Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Colonel Mike Black, U.S. Air Force retired, Vice President for Defense, AFCEA International.
All right, good afternoon. You know, when your boss likes Bruno Mars, that becomes your walk-up music as well. So, pop, pop, guess who's back again? Hey, good afternoon. I want to thank you all for joining us today. It's my pleasure to introduce the moderator for the Principal Cyber Advisors panel, and that would be Brigadier General Terrence Adams, the Deputy Principal Cyber Advisor to the Secretary of Defense, and Senior Military Advisor for Cyber Policy. Now, General Adams and I go way back. We both were born in the John A. Andrew Teaching Hospital in Tuskegee, Alabama. So we have that in common. He is a mentee of mine. He's not afraid to call me a mentor, so I'm honored to do the introduction. He's one of those rare individuals who has served in 2 of our military services. He enlisted in the Army following graduation from high school, and then later joined Air Force through ROTC. He has commanded at the squadron, group, and wing level, both at home and deployed. Now, as the Deputy PCA for the Department of Defense, he serves as a Principal Cyber Advisor to the Secretary on military cyber forces and activities. He's responsible for assessing and overseeing the implementation of cyber strategy of the Department and execution of the Cyber Posture Review of the Department on behalf of the Secretary. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, please join me in welcoming General Adams and his panel to the stage.
Hello, everybody. How y'all doing today?
Good.
So I love Bruno Mars too, ma'am. So I'm a huge fan. If anybody was in Charleston with me at Wing Command, that was always my intro music coming onto the stage. So thank you, Mike Black, for the introduction. I appreciate that. Thanks for your long partnership and friendship over the years. Today we're really here to really kind of give you an opportunity to understand what is a Principal Cyber Advisor. Many times when I go into the meetings, people are asking, hey, TA, what do you do? And I was asking that same question before I got to the job. So I have my team here right there. So Jesse and Dave, raise your hand, and Treva, whenever you get questions, so we do want questions, please address them to Dave, Treva, and Jesse. Like, really just type their name in for the hard questions, because they're really doing the work. I'm the one that's trying to help move things along. Today I'm joined by 3 members, right? So how the department is formed with the cyber advisor, the Principal Cyber Advisor, they're at the military department level. So we have representation from the Army that covers down on the Army as a service. We have the Air Force that covers down on the Space Force, and then also the Air Force. And then we also have the Navy that takes care of the Marines and the Navy. So each one of us do just a little bit of different things and how we execute the roles and responsibilities. But in 2014, about 10 years ago, it was when Congress penned and enacted these positions called the Principal Cyber Advisor. It has grown over the years to be able to morph into what it exists today, which at my office is not having cross-functional teams when we started, but now we have 3 directors that lead. And the primary things that we do is to support United States Cyber Command through oversight. We do that by looking at money. So we have, if you're tracking enhanced budget control that was enacted this year. It's where we pull the money from the services doing cyber operations, and now we provide oversight for that. We also give them the command physical guidance that tells them, here are the big things that we're seeing across the department. We look at our cyber strategy, and you heard Mike introduce the Cyber Posture Review, to be able to determine what are the things that we want them to focus on when we're looking at the POM. We also issue programming guidance. So cyber operations programming guidance, we call the COPG. We penned that out this year as well to be able to give the department, not just the command, but across the department, here are the things that we want you all to focus on. And then that gives us an opportunity to certify their budget. So one of the things that Congress wrote in is the ability to certify the budget for the whole department. And what we do is we give them guidance up front, and then we ask them to go through and program the things in that we find valuable through a set of priorities. Those are the influence levers that we have when it comes to the money part of the job. Jesse's team that's here helps us to support an oversight of readiness training and a workforce design. So it's Cyber Command designed to be able to meet the mission that we want them to do. And then when it's not, what are the things that we need to do to enact change toward that design? Many of you all, if you're watching and hearing the things that are being talked about in the news, Cyber Command 2.0 is one of the things that you may hear about. Also, RAND did a study that illuminated some things that we already knew, but really just validated some of the things that we knew about the cyber force and the way it's currently designed today. So those are a list of things that we're working on today. The things that I think we need partnership. We're partnering with the CIO. As you can understand, you just heard the fireside chat, and many of the words you heard that came from Ms. Beavers were about cybersecurity. And so the difference between the two offices and what we do is that my office is focused on cyber operations. So that would be offense and defense. And if you're really understanding what goes on between offense and defense, in that defensive pillar, it really hits with this cybersecurity thing. And now how do we talk about the policies, the money that differentiate between the two, what's cybersecurity and what is defense? And those are the collaborations that we have. I have a new boss, Miss Ashley Manning. I think she stepped out. She didn't want to listen to me. Oh, there she is. So she didn't leave me yet. But raise your hand there, Ashley. So that's my new boss right there. Woo woo for Ashley, round of applause. So on this journey about talking about the 10-year anniversary, Congress asked the department, hey, why don't you stand up a Assistant Secretary of Defense for cyber? This is an opportunity to focus in on cyber. When we started, the office was under the OSD policy with the Homeland Defense. Then it moved under space policy. And about 3 months ago, we welcomed Ashley in, performing the duties of the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Cyber. And Mika Oyen's team that does the traditional policy role, we came together to form a new ASD called Cyber. And that's really given us an opportunity to focus in on the mission and the task at hand, to be able to partner with the other components inside the building to drive the change that we need, to provide that robust oversight as we're trying to look toward the future. And the one thing that we're trying to do is how do we continue to try to match and outpace our adversaries. And that comes from innovation, that comes from the equipment that we're going to buy. So we're here at this conference to meet many members from the industry, to understand what are the new capabilities that we should be looking at. The command is here doing the same thing, and as we provide oversight, it's good for us to come out and listen. My leadership tenets are listen, lift, love, if you've been tracking what I do. And so this is an opportunity today for us to listen to you all, and we'll do that when we get to questions. So I'll stop yakking and stop talking about what I do. I'll give each one of the panel members an opportunity to step through. They're going to tell you a little bit about their background, and then they're going to talk to you about some of the things that they're working on, and we'll step through in the order that we have here. We'll circle back and give you an opportunity to ask questions. So I will ask you to start thinking about those questions. Again, address them to Jesse, Trevor, and Dave. Just remember that. And then that gives an opportunity to hear from you. And if you don't have any questions, then I have some other questions we'll circle back to. So Rebecca, I'll turn it over to you. And first, congratulations to Rebecca. So she's been selected to go to the Eisenhower School in her reserve capacity. So a round of applause for her. And ma'am, I'll turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, sir. It's such an honor and a privilege to be here at TechNet Cyber. If you'd asked me that I would be here 10 years ago, I would not have believed you. Someone asked me to tell a joke earlier today. I think the joke's on me, that I'm up here on this stage. My first job in the Army was a helicopter pilot. And it was I think I went to school before the internet really became a thing. I got my first email address in ROTC. So I had no idea that here I would be today to talk about cyberspace activities and be in the cyber domain, working at the Pentagon on the E-ring, you know, so fancy. But it's such a privilege. But people ask me if I miss flying, and I would say no. because I know that cyberspace operations are such a critical part of what we're doing for national security. I'm so proud to be a part of it. How did I even get here? I had such a great opportunity to be a congressional fellow. And my first job in the congressional world was to be the legislative liaison for cyberspace for the Army and start this whole portfolio. They said, you know, the Congress is really interested in cyber. Maybe you could go help us tell the Army story about cyberspace to Congress. And I had the privilege of taking General Nakasone, General Morrison, and several other Army leaders, General Barrett, to Capitol Hill and really hear from our leaders what their priorities were, how they wanted to take the Army forward in cyberspace, stand up the cyber branch. So the Army was the first to stand up the cyber branch, and really be proud to be a part of it. Our senior leaders, the Secretary of the Army, her number 2 priority has been to become a more data-centric Army, which means we've got to secure our data and we have to project power in cyberspace. So it's great to know that our senior leaders are interested in that. General George, the Chief of Staff, he also talks about making sure our technology is accessible so that we can be the most lethal force in the Army and really make sure that our warfighters have those capabilities and it's not just something that we have in our cyberspace community.
Well, thank you. We'll go Navy. We have Josh is here. He's been in his office for a period of time, so turn it over to you, Josh.
Hi, it's great to be here at TechNet 2024. I'm Josh Ryder. I'm a career intelligence officer by trade, and about 3 years ago, when they were forming the Navy Principal Cyber Advisor Office, I volunteered to be the deputy, and similar to my colleague, it's been quite the whirlwind. Since then, we've come out with a cyberspace superiority vision. We've come out with a full-blown Department of the Navy cyber strategy. We've created a new officer designator, a new enlisted rating. Fleet Cyber Command's really become a well-instantiated organization. And similar to General Adams, the Navy PCA, where it differs from the CIO, is that we focus more on cyber operations, although we do also focus on security and intelligence support to cyber and the full spectrum. Once again, glad to be here. Hope you all enjoy the panel.
Andrew, the reservist that we have here that's on Ms. Jones' chief staff, and we'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, sir. Good afternoon, everybody. Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Wampat. I am the acting deputy for Dr. Wanda Jones-Heath, the Principal Cyber Advisor for the Air Force and Space Force. My background, I enlisted in the Navy Intel, got commissioned to the Army, had a break in service, went active Army, had a break in service, and then came to the Air National Guard. And so I've been with the Air National Guard since 2006, Maryland specifically. Been with that state since 2006. I've had various jobs, like any panelist members up here or anybody in the military. Commanded a squadron, went off, did some stuff at DARPA as a CETA, helped stand up the Joint Artificial Intelligence Center for Cyber, which we later grew into Joint Information Warfare. Went to work at Air Force Futures, jumped back to industry, again in a guard capacity, just jumped back in between orders. And then someone asked if I would like to come to the Principal Cyber Advisor's office, and to panel members' point, it's a new office, and I was like, what's that? And so they said, well, you know, they do a lot of the policy side for the Department of Air Force. And if you had asked me 10 years ago, would you want to be a staff officer? I would have said, absolutely not. That is, I don't think anybody wants to be a staff officer. But what you realize quickly is, especially from my command time, that if you want to have change as a commander, your change impact is very local to your organization. But if you want to have lasting impact for a service, for DoD, it has to be done at the policy level. So I jumped at the opportunity to come work for Dr. Wanda Jones-Heath, and here I am. Look forward to getting after policies that will impact the DAF.
So I was on the air staff before I got into this current position, and I saw Ms. Jones-Heath be able to work the building to get things done. And so what the PCA can do is just bridge across all the portfolios on a staff to be able to see the opportunities and the equities and to be able to drive change. And I saw her do that when SEP come out from NSA in Congress, and she was able to bring the right people together and then turn it over to them. It's not something that we will keep, but we can bring. We have convening authority. We understand the issues and sometimes those issues would have fallen on the floor, but the PCA can be a strong advocate and champion for issues. So we'll go to Rebecca for this kind of first question. I know General Rob Lyman in the audience probably has a hard question he's typing away right now for you. But if you would, tell us about some of the unique activities that you're doing in your office.
Thank you. So I will start out by saying some of the less unique first is one of the differences between where you sit in your PCA role and where the MILDEP sit is that while you're focused on cyberspace operations, the military departments have to look at the entire cyberspace activities budget. So cybersecurity, cyber R&D, cyber operations, the whole cyber enchilada that the Army is spending. So my role is to look at all of that investment, and that's something that we statutorily have to look at as a military department. So Dr. Sulmeyer knows that that's his role, we do that job, but one of the things that he's really focused on, so Dr. Michael Sulmeyer is the Army Principal Cyber Advisor. It's been great to work with him, met him up at CyberCon, and some of the things that he's focused our attention on is the cyber workforce and cyber talent development. He's done a couple of things. So one is we've made sure that all of the resources are in place to ensure that the Army has great incentives. Ms. Beavers talked about cyber accepted service. The Army has fully implemented that and our workforce is growing. More and more work roles are getting assigned to those communities and we're able to bring in talent with those capabilities and offer them some incentives, so that's great. But even more, we know that we're all here in this room talking about cyberspace, but we really need to expand our audience. And so one of the ways that he's done that is, has anybody listened to the podcast Control Alt Army? So Dr. Michael Sulmeyer started a podcast where he has been interviewing some of the Army's senior leaders and kind of exploring what does cyber do for them, or how did they come to realize that cyber operations and cybersecurity are important to the whole of Army operations. And it's been really great to hear from General Flynn, who's out in the Indo-PACOM community. Obviously, anything having to do with China is really interesting. And he said, I realized in my younger experiences that the network is a weapon system. I said, that's fantastic, that here's somebody in the Army operational command environment who understands the value of what the network brings to us. And he also said, one of the things that we need to do better at is how we talk. So we speak really technically, or with our cyber speak, he says you really need to learn how to have a better language to talk about the operational outcome of what the cyber operations brings to the force. And I really thought that was important, and that's something that I've really tried to do, not coming from the intelligence or the signal communities. How can I facilitate those healthy conversations about the outcomes rather than just number of ready teams and number of soldiers? Well, what does that really mean? And so that's the first thing he's done is this podcast, which I would encourage you all to learn or take a listen to. He also, and I got to sell the reserves here, General Jody Daniels, the Chief of the Army Reserve, they just posted her podcast. She's has a PhD in computer science, so she knows, she has that technical speak, and she too talked about how she had to learn how to speak more with less jargon in this environment. So I think that's maybe a lesson we can all take from today as I walk around, and even I'm still learning what some of our capabilities are. So that was the first thing, is he said, I'm going to do this podcast and really try to reach out to the community. The second thing he did that I think is really kind of neat is he's trying to develop, not just broaden our community, but how do we then grow our leadership in the cyber community. So we started, on behalf of the Secretary, the Cyber Strategic Seminar, where we've hand-selected 12 up-and-coming cyber experts in our civilian and military populations, and we've given them the chance to meet with all kinds of really interesting people for briefings and meetings. They've gone to Capitol Hill, they've met with Foreign Affairs Magazine, they've met with the Australian Signals Directorate, and these are really some rock stars that I'm really looking forward to see what they have to offer in the future. So we've got to look broad and then also deepen, so we have a deep bench for talent in the future. And I'm really excited about expanding our capacity.
Well, I didn't know about the podcast, so it's good to hear about that. I want to be a first-time listener, so you can share that information, that'd be good. And speaking about growing leadership, that was just a reminder of what AFCEA has done, at least personally for my career. So as a young lieutenant, I was at in AFCEA at Langley Air Force Base, and it was an opportunity for me to grow, see leaders, just outside of the workplace. And so General Lawrence, to you and your whole staff, just thank you for what you all do. Having AFCEA as an organization that young, lieutenants and enlisted members can come to meet people from industry is just a wealth of knowledge and interaction. I was also the president of the AFCEA chapter at Scott Air Force Base, and I saw Carlos effort, out here too. But, AFCEA has been a benefit to me to give me opportunity to learn new leadership roles. And so speaking of your leader, right, we know he's been nominated to be the ASD for cyber. So upon confirmation that happens, he stepped into that seat. So we want to congratulate him for that, kind of nomination. And then also the Navy, as we transition over to you, Josh. Anne Marie, if you know Anne Marie, she was in my office prior to working on the Office of the Principal Cyber Advisor, the OSD staff, and then went over to the Joint Staff J6. And then now she was nominated and then got hired to come in to work as the Navy PCA. So I'll turn it over to you to talk about in 2023, I understand you all did a cyber strategy that you all rolled out. You mind sharing the things that you all have done since you rolled out your cyber strategy?
Sure. So first, we're actually very grateful to have Anne Marie Schumann as our new PCA. We're very lucky to have poached her from you. In November of 23, we published the first, the inaugural Department of the Navy cyber strategy, and now we're working on the inaugural DON cyber strategy implementation plan. This may come as a shock to people, but a lot of times in the military, we create strategies and they become what we refer to as shelfware, and they protect the shelf from a layer of dust in an ominous thundercloud sort of way. So we're working on an implementation plan covering a lot of similar things in terms of developing our workforce. Separate from the strategy, we've been working very hard at getting our workforce cyber coded with the new Defense Cyber Workforce Framework updates that have been spearheaded by the DoD CIO. And we've driven the Navy civilian vacancy rate down by DoD metrics to below 12%. So we're leading the way on that. The other thing that's a big focus of our implementation plan is operational technology, or OT, and industrial control systems, ICS. Being the Navy, we have a whole bunch of tiny little cities, some of which are not so tiny, with their own nuclear reactors and water plants and power plants and steering gear and all sorts of stuff that isn't traditional IT, that still has programmable logic controllers and other things that need to be cyber hardened and secured from an adversary. That even though we pay attention to them, they don't get as much of a spotlight as traditional enterprise IT. There's not as many people in the space. They're not dominating as much of the conversation as more traditional cybersecurity. We are seeing a lot more of it. There have been some presidential executive orders on things like protecting the water supply, which are very similar to what we're doing in the Navy. But the focus of our implementation plan on the PCA side, it's a joint product with the PCA and the CIO. The CIO still got the DOT for all of the traditional cybersecurity stuff, our program called Cyber Ready, whereas on the PCA side, we're focused more on that operational technology and helping the CIO get more into that area. That's been our big thrust.
Well, good. And just as you all launched the strategy, the DoD had a cyber strategy that came out, Mika Oyang's team in cyber policy rolled it out, and now we're doing the same thing, trying to roll out an implementation plan that would take that document and transform it into actionable things. And speaking about those actionable things on the air staff, we had a mission analysis task force that had about 67 different activities that would lead to change across the Air Force. You've seen some of those things kind of roll out from the Secretary of the Air Force. But one of those things and decisions that he made was a decision that we talked about when I was still on the staff about the utility for having warrant officers. So I know right now the Air Force is down in San Antonio for their first warrant officer board that they probably had maybe in about 50 years. So Andrew, you mind kind of telling us what you all have been doing surrounding bringing warrant officers for cyber?
Roger. So warrant officers, I did a Google search yesterday. The Air Force appointed its last warrant officer in 1959. It's like 65 years ago. So this is a watershed event for us in the Air Force to bring warrant officers back. 65 years ago, we appointed our last warrant officer, and in this year, we'll appoint our new class of warrant officers, specifically for cyber and IT. But in doing so, obviously, having been in the Navy and the Army, I've worked with warrant officers, I know what they do, and throughout the services, they are your SMEs for any of your given MOSs or AFSCs or raids. With that, so we already know that they come in being technically proficient, that they have to be technically proficient, and that's a high bar. So from the Air Force perspective, given that it's new, well, how do we make sure we find the right warrant officers? So the current board that General Adams just mentioned, they're hard at work, we've got packages, and they're going through the applicants. But what I'd like to kind of talk about here specifically is one of the challenges that even the Army faces, and that is how do we find people that are straight off the street, capable of becoming warrant officers. And that's a hard problem set. If you just think about workforce in general, there's obviously industries, got technical SMEs, and so how do we find those technical SMEs that would make good warrant officers and bring them into our fold? So first, to find those people, we want to make sure that we don't focus, well, as part of it, that some of the focus is actually not looking at the technical aspects of what they bring, because we have tons of assessments. If you look across industries, there's certifications out the wazoo about how you can understand someone's technical chops. But what about all the other things that make someone successful? When you're a warrant officer, you're expected to come into a team and not only be the technical SME, but advise a commander, be on a team, and mentor people. So how do you find those people? That is not an easy task. I think we all know if you've been on a team, that is by no stretch of imagination something you can do quickly or easily. So I'm kind of rewind this story. Back in 2016 when I took command, I really wanted to understand how do we build cyber high-performing teams. If you're familiar with the cyber operations in the schoolhouses, you chunk through cyber and it's all individual tasks, right? There's no true collective tasks at the back end, like through my Army training and Navy training, where you get together and you execute as a team so you can build that kind of cohesion. So I really wanted to understand how we build high-performing cyber teams because we weren't getting after it in the sense that I thought we could. So I reached out to industry. I saw something that Red Bull put on for hacking. And yeah, Red Bull, the energy drink. And so I called Red Bull, I Googled their number, and I call them. I'm like, hey, I heard there was some hacking thing you guys did, and all I heard was click. And I was like, time makes sense. The person knew nothing about what I was talking about. So I pinged my network to see if anybody could help me get to somebody in Red Bull. One of my mentors, who's here, Henry Sinkowitz, he put me in contact with the CIO of Red Bull. The CIO of Red Bull turned me over to the chief performance scientist at Red Bull, and we started talking about what it takes to build high-performing teams in cyber. And I gave him this big, long pitch about my theory about building high-performing teams in cyber. And him and his team were like, listening intently, and they're like, wow, that sounds really good, Andrew. None of that's right. None of what you said is based in science, but here's how to look at it. When we deal with Olympians, and when we deal with post athletes, when we deal with your soft forces, here's what we look at when we build the individual that will contribute to this team. Here's what you need to look at, blah, blah, blah. So we run through that. That point in time helped me understand, so from 2016 to 2019, I'm working with high-performing organizations across industry, and it really helped me understand the science behind building the science and the approaches that the industry uses to build Olympians, pro athletes, the soft forces. So in 2019, I ran a high-performance cyber team training, and that was a critical point for me because what I got to do then is had all the theory, I got to talk to people, but during that training, you got to actually see the implementation of what it takes to build a team, how it looks, and the approaches to doing that. So when I got offered so fast forward to this year, 2024, Secretary of the Air Force comes out and announces that the Air Force is going to stand up warrant officers. Never had warrant officers for 65 years. They're supposed to be our technical SMEs. They're supposed to mentor, help lead teams, and solve those tough challenges. Sounds a lot like what a high-performing individual and a high-performing team should do. So when I heard that, I knew that if I could contribute anything to the community, it would be the lessons I learned and the approaches that the high performance community uses to build their teams. So I got on my boss's schedule, Dr. Wanda Jones-Heath, and I explained to her the things that I was tracking on what it takes to build teams, and she's like, well, let's start investigating this. And what would that mean? So when you think about street-to-seat warrant officers, people will pluck off from industry, obviously tons of technical credibility, but how do we know that they will acculturate and they will be high performers that we expect our warrant officers to do and on those missions? I've worked with the DoD CIO workforce innovation team over there to try to understand what that looks like and how that would have to look like to scale across the DoD. Because again, understanding what that would look like and how we can leverage what industry is already doing to build that workforce, starting with the warrant officers. And when I get asked, like, why would you start with the warrant officers? Why doesn't this scale across the service or the DoD? I'm not saying it doesn't, but I am saying that in talking to the high performance community, the awesomeness about the warrant officer community is it's new. They don't come with a lot of baggage of traditions that we got to break through. We've always done it that way. We're just going to run stronger, harder, faster, longer. That is not how the high performance community looks at it. In keeping with the upcoming events in the Olympics, like that's not how Olympians train. That's not how you develop, how you identify, assess, and develop Olympians. So if we're expecting our warrant officers to be that caliber of performing on a team, executing mission, mentoring, and leading, then we need to understand what we can take in those approaches. So one of those approaches is that what would it look like if we could identify what makes a good cyber warrant officer from a cognitive perspective? Not just asking questions, and again, not on the technical side, but how do they think? How do they approach problem solving? And can we find people that approach it in the same way? Not from the lens of groupthink, because groupthink is you're getting a bunch of people together that have the same biases, same experiences, so you're going to get the same answers that you've always been getting. So what we're looking at is that diversity of experiences that lend to the same kind of approach to problem solving. So an approach would be, when you receive new information, can you update your model to get to a new and novel solution? Right? That's an approach. And so how do we understand that? And there's technologies out there that can help us do this. So let's go find those technologies. So looking at the human side, the cognitive aspect of it, when you think about the triad of organize, train, and equip, right? Organize your workforce, your unit of action. Here you're going to train, and here you're going to equip. What are the capabilities you're going to employ? We always think in that triad. And when you talk to SOF, what they did is they were also running in that triad, and they were going with the run harder, faster, longer, stronger, forever. But it wasn't working for them. So they took a step back. And when they looked at that triad, organize, train, equip, they said, well, what do we organize? We organize at the people level. Like the people have to make that organization, that unit of action. Our people have to be trained. They have to take the training and develop those skills. Our people have to employ the capabilities on mission. So the thing that underpins this triad are the people. So now we flip this two-dimensional diagram of organize, train, equip, and you look at it at a three-dimensional level, and you pull it up, and now you have people at the top, like a pyramid. So the number one soft truth is people are more important than hardware. And I would imagine that everybody in this room would agree with that statement as it relates to us getting on mission and being successful, and how do we take care of our people. So when you think about how they look at it, it's no longer just that simple triad and how do we get after and getting at that triad. It's actually looking at the people and the approaches that make the people better. So I say that because when we look at warrant officers, one thing we're guessing is the approaches that help us make better people. Better people make better teams and create better outcomes. So sir, to answer your question, as we look at approaches, or what other approaches are we using when it comes to street to seat? What are the approaches industry uses to find their cyber high performers, to identify, assess, select, and more importantly, develop their high performers, because that's who our warrant officers will be.
So thanks, Andrew. What Andrew highlights is this kind of intersection between what I call success. Like success has never been achieved alone. It's always been achieved with different parties coming together. Another great reason why to be at AFCEA, to be able to leak challenges and problems that we may have, the high performance team story you gave us, is a partnership with industry. And that is the beauty about us being here today, is to be able to share some things that we're working on and then seek opportunities for partnership with industry too. So thank you for that, Andrew. Now's the time to open it up for questions. If you all have any questions, we do have one round of questions that I'm saving for the team, but I want to make sure that we're listening to you. So who's the voice in the sky? Do we have any questions out there? What's his name?
Sir, we have a whole bunch of them.
Oh, wow. Okay, let's go. Bring them. Wait, excuse me. If there are any for Terrence Adams, then please redirect them to Jesse, but go ahead.
Yes, sir, will do. First question, can you discuss what your services are doing to improve the detection and prevention of counterfeit and non-contract compliant components in DoD hardware, perhaps such as guided systems, computer chips, processors, routers, radios?
Go with the Navy first. I see the Navy person is like, man, guidance systems, that's all me. Josh, over to you first, and then it's giving you two an opportunity to think deeply about that one.
I think that was the modern day equivalent of get her, Ray. In broad brushstrokes, again, we are policy shops, so I can't get really into the weeds, but there is an emphasis within the government, within DoD, very much like industry, for the H-bomb, X-bomb, S-bomb, the hardware bill of materials, the software bill of materials, and both. We've looked for years, not just at the counterfeiting of components, but the pedigree of those components in terms of where they're manufactured. Now we're looking for legitimately counterfeit components in those bill of materials. We've always paid a little bit of attention to where were these components made, whether they were counterfeit or not, to ensure that we weren't giving an adversary the opportunity to insert something into our systems. But what we're doing in government is very much what's becoming industry standard in terms of those bills of materials.
Okay. Rebecca, I don't know if you
Sure. Much like Josh said, I mean, we're a small team of policy-oriented folks at the very high levels of the Army. And because the Army is so big, we definitely leverage the other more experts in our acquisition community. They're working more on the platforms and the weapon systems and understanding where the vulnerabilities might lie. So that's something that there is a team in the Army that looks at those kinds of things, and where our office has been successful is finding the gaps. Where are areas that we're not taking a look at, and understanding and making sure that the Army has an office or a point of contact, and that the Army is looking at vulnerabilities that maybe haven't been looked at in quite some time. But we know that this is a problem, and so there's an office looking at it.
Okay, Andrew, thank you.
So obviously, same as the other services. I think the one thing that when I think through that question, in my mind, it obviously spells out the supply chain risk management thing. But from the Air Force perspective, we stood up the CROs, the Cyber Resiliency Office Weapons System, and the CROCs to help get after some of those challenges that the question alludes to.
Okay. Next question we have, what's the gentleman's name in this guy? Terry. Go ahead, Terry. Next question.
Thank you, sir. There is growing discussion of a single cyber corps rather than cyber branches across each of the services. Would this be a more effective way to pool our talent and to cover all the missions across DoD cyberspace operations?
So Terry, none of these people up here are going to answer that question. Anybody want to take that one? See? Terry. So, I mean, only because there's
Josh
a lot.
has the good answer.
Oh, okay.
He has the.
No, there's a lot of discussion about that, and a lot of the discussion is focused about the need to do a study. So I think the responsible thing for all of us to do is to wait for such a study to be done and see what the facts lay out.
Thank you, Josh. Next question.
What role do cyber advisors play in the department's adoption of Zero Trust by end of fiscal year 2027?
And so for my office, it's more so of ensuring that we're using the levers to influence the department. We use those levers for providing guidance out. So as we put out our cyber operations guidance, we ensure that Zero Trust was a part of that guidance. And then as we go back into certifying the budgets of the entities that receive dollars for cyber operations, they come through and do kind of a parade drill where they brief us on, here are the things we're doing to meet that end. That gives us an indication that the things that we're asking them to do, the guidance that we're putting out is really being followed. So that's our kind of accountability mechanism that we use to be able to ensure that the things that we see in the future that are important to the department are being done. And I've seen this in action. While I was on the air staff, there was an opportunity to ensure that there were the dollars for some SATCOM material. So Honorable Sherman was the one who called up to the Undersecretary of the Air Force at the time and said, hey, I don't see these dollars programmed into the budget. When it comes to budget certification, we may or may not recommend to the Secretary to certify the budget. And about 10 days later, those dollars was in that SATCOM portfolio. Right? That is an opportunity to show that there's an accountability mechanism through the guidance that's sent out that provided to the services and other entities to ensure that the things that we want to meet, the priorities that we have at the department, are being done. So that's one lever that I use in my portfolio. I'll turn it over to you first. I'll start with Andrew on that end and see what you all are doing.
So I think from the Air Force perspective, from the DAF perspective, the Principal Cyber Advisor, the General Adams mentioned earlier, we provide advocacy. So as the different organizations within the DAF, they advocate for their own equities, understandably. And so my boss, as it relates to Zero Trust, she sits back and she takes in both of those. And so when they go to the Secretary and they say, well, we need this or we need that, if there's not a compelling reason, compelling my word, not my boss's word or the Secretary's word, for which way we should go, he turns to my boss and asks her to advise him on which way to go. So the PCAs, assuming you guys are the same, we don't have budgets and we don't own programs. And as a function of that, we can be that trusted advisor because we're not worried about the money taken out of any programs we have. So we can give that, or she can give that trusted advice to the Secretary, again, to help understand where people's equities are and help distill down other things that the Secretary might need to think about when he makes a decision as it relates to which way to go with Zero Trust, or to help the CIO, because the PCAs provide advice to the Secretariat General.
Josh, how's the Navy influencing Zero Trust?
Very similar. Our big superpower is certifying the adequacy of the budget. That is pretty much our contribution, is making sure that any Zero Trust plans are realistic and executable and then funded, to make sure that we can do the most that we can with the money, but we also don't throw money at something that is too big to execute in any given fiscal year. Again, we're a policy shop. Budget adequacy is pretty much it.
Sure, I'll echo some of the same things. The budget adequacy, where we are able to see how primarily the CIO in the Army and the Army G6 are organizing and investing in the Zero Trust elements, if you will. We've heard Ms. Beavers talk about there are a number of different elements, and she specifically called out ICAM. And we could see in the budget, just like we all talked about, there's our investment in ICAM and how we're strategically bringing those investments to fruition and make sure they're executable. So adequacy of the budget, and then also the Army has something called the Army Unified Network Council, and the Army PCA sits on that council as an advisor, making sure that our investments in things like Zero Trust are balanced in alignment with all of the other types of investments that we have to make. So he's an advocate in that forum as well.
Sure, great.
And I'll tack on to that. When we talk about Zero Trust, the other thing we try to do is make sure that we look down all those stovepipes for weapon systems and critical infrastructure and those things that may get overlooked in traditional enterprise IT budgets.
Yeah. So I mean, that's a great question to really highlight one of the benefits of having a PCA, right? Is that the PCA can be able to look through budgets. Because in the building, the tools and the levers that we have, are trying to create dollars that are going to produce capability at the end of the day, right? We'll use policy, we'll use the products to be able to do that, but at the end of the day, it's all about trying to get that palm out and then managing it. So another player that we have at the table that sits on council that has the ear of leadership can be able to give them advisement to say, hey, this project, Zero Trust, may not be doing well in the process, in the adjudication of dollars at the staff level. We may need a senior leader to come in and say, hey, we might need to get more interest. And that's what the PCAs can do, because most of them have that direct kind of relationship with their secretary to be able to fight those kind of things. So.
Actually, I'd like to add on to that. I think at the senior levels, they are having a lot of those kind of conversations really successfully. You can ask any Army senior leader and they would be able to tell you what Zero Trust is, and they're doing a great job. And the conversations I have maybe at those lower staff levels with other folks looking at our resources or our capabilities, we're still teaching people what Zero Trust is. So we're able to, within the PCA office, kind of have those conversations and be advocates within other places in the Pentagon besides just at those senior tables.
Thank you. All right, Terry, what's next?
What is being done to advocate for cyber professionals in the military services when the culture of each service at times seems to undervalue their national security contributions in favor of operations in each of their own specialized domains, air, land, sea, space?
Rebecca, we'll go to you first.
Sure. So like I mentioned before, that's definitely something that Dr. Michael Stuhlmeier is interested in, and that's one of the reasons he created that podcast, is how are we communicating with the typical warfighters in the Army who couldn't spell cyber if you asked them to, is they know rifle or tank or helicopter, and why would cyber be important to them? So how can we go explain, well, my first helicopter didn't have a computer screen in it, but now they do. And if the adversary gets inside of the computer in your helicopter, you aren't flying anywhere. So how do we materially make sure that they understand this is organizational business, and these cyberspace operators are here to help, and without them, you may not get off the ground.
Yeah. Josh?
So first, I'm never getting into a helicopter again. What I would say is, even though we, in broad brushstrokes, paint, ground, sea, air, the Navy Marine Corps team operates in the air, on land, and at sea. And once again, this may come as a shock to the audience, but there's just a tad bit of tension between our surface fleet and our aviators and our submarine force officers. So I don't see quite the fracture with the cyber force any more than I see with information warfare, surface warfare, submarine warfare, air warfare. It's something that has to be addressed, and I think it's something that is more of a micro problem at the macro. That is to say, it's the responsibility of every leader in the organization to ensure that the people under their charge, under their command, feel valued regardless of community. And we have a tendency to think that we're special in that way on the cyber side, and I really don't think that we are. I think that's a leadership problem that's handled by individual leaders, some extraordinarily well, some not as well.
Okay.
So I would say I'm not going to say I'll push back on that question, but I would say that I typically don't think I see that when I think about the DoD, and for a few reasons. One, obviously, each of our services, we have unique missions. And so we have unique cyber requirements to get after those unique missions. Two, go to Cyber Command, look at Cyber Command as a joint command. You will see all those services in the cyber domain doing cyber stuff. There's not a, hey, Army's cyber team, Air Force cyber team, you're good, you're bad, blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, we all have a mission to do, and we're doing it, we're producing the outcome that's expected. And then you look at the joint training, like we're trying to get after that joint training, understand what that training is to be, so that there is that level playing field. So when you think through that kind of that siloed approach, that's an artifact of how we came up. But I would say that moving forward, as of easily like 5 years ago, we're knocking down those barriers, so we're not so siloed.
Okay, thank you. Terry, how many questions do we have more, just to give me an idea to manage the time?
I've got about 4 or 5 left, General.
All right, let's keep rolling. You all have a lot of questions. Thank you for the questions.
Are you each able to give any advice to industry when they engage in exchanges with the service components, when they may have confusion about what cyber capabilities they should expect to receive from Cybercom or DISA versus what each component is responsible for themselves?
Let's give this question to Jesse out there. No, I'm just playing, Jesse. Josh, what do you got?
Could you repeat
Yeah,
that?
exactly.
That's why I was calling on Jesse. It was a hard one. Go ahead, Terry. Can you give us a repeat on that one?
Absolutely. The question is, how should industry best engage with each service component when they might have confusion about what cyber capabilities come from Cybercom or DISA versus each of the component cyber commands?
I'll jump in if you
yeah,
want.
please, no.
Sure. So I think each of the services probably organized just a little bit differently, and I think it needs to be conversations. Is that you're not necessarily here to do a sales pitch. I've worked in industry, like I said, I'm a reservist. I tell people I've had all the ID cards. I've been in the reserve, the guard, a civilian, and a contractor. So I see it from all lenses, and definitely from a for-profit perspective as well. I think it just needs to be more educational rather than I'm here to sell you a product, because even within the ginormous army, there are a lot of communities that don't know what the other is doing, and so it might be seen as underhanded to go to one office and not the other, or to assume or leverage. So just more information, more educational, kind of open-ended conversations, because I think it's just, we're all still learning. I was out on the floor today, and a lot of companies that I'm not familiar with, and I go, how do I quickly learn what all of these companies have to offer? Because it's asking a lot to have all those conversations. So just continued kind of contact and comfortable conversation.
Josh, you're about to add something.
Yeah, so I'm still a little unclear on the vector of the question, but I'll sort of triple down and just say communicate, communicate, communicate. I've been government or military in one form or another for going on 30 years. And what I see is that most of the failures are failures to communicate. My not so favorite example, it was a level of effort contract where they were supposed to provide me labor, and 6 months into the contract they identified that the reason they'd been unable to staff 60% of the billets was because the person who had written the statement of work had classified the labor categories, the job descriptions of the people we were trying to bring on, had made them secret, and there was literally nothing secret about them, and the headhunter didn't have a clearance. So they were doing what we call bring me a rock drill. How about this guy? Well, no, they don't meet the qualifications. Can you tell me what the qualifications are? No, they're classified. So things like that, that and things like that are the number one thing that I see. I can't speak to DISA or Cybercom. I don't think my colleagues really can either. I could be wrong. But just if you have questions, be unafraid to put them out there. The other thing I would say is have an understanding that when you are trying to infiltrate into a government market, replacing an entire end-to-end process for the government is probably a non-starter, and the smaller you can chunk down whatever your solution is to fill the gap that the government actually has, as opposed to, hey, in order to fill that 5% gap, I'm going to give you this entire spectrum as a service and replace years of work to build your existing process, as opposed to, well, I just need this little piece to finish. Be able to sell us that little piece.
Okay.
So I'm going to hit on the caller's first part of the question. That is, how does industry engage? And I'll speak for the PCA on the PCA side. I won't say from the service or Cyber Command or DISA, but from the services side. Like Rebecca, I'm in the reserve component, the Air National Guard. So I've been in industry, I've been a contractor, been on orders, hopping back and forth. And so what the PCA, the DAF PCA office did is we created a vendor engagement, industry engagement slick sheet. And what does that mean? On this sheet, when we have a vendor engagement, as a recent example of this, and I'll get to this sheet in a second, is a company came to visit my boss and brief her on their capabilities. 30-minute meeting, 45 slides. Yeah, I know, I heard laughter. Right, exactly, that's exactly right. So 5-10 minutes up front for the hellos and the get to know yous, 10 minutes at the back end for questions. That leaves about 20 minutes to get through 45 slides. How, and my word, how worthless is that meeting? Because all we're doing is flipping, hitting these wave tops that don't mean anything to us. So we created a vendor engagement worksheet. And when a vendor asks to meet with my boss, we shoot this out to the organization. And on this sheet, it specifically says, here's what the PCA office does. We don't have money, we don't have programs, we do advocacy and have influence. Here's our top 3 challenges. What is it that you have that's a differentiator from your competitors? Why is it? And one of the things I always find interesting, and I can't imagine anybody up here has not experienced this. When we meet with industry, they come up and they're like, we've got the best people. We've got X, Y, Z, we've got the best. 30 minutes later, we'll meet with another company, we've got the best people. Another 30 minutes later, another company, we've got the best people. So then you ask yourself, how is it everybody has the best people? Where are all these best people? Where are all these best people? Why are they not in the military defending our nation? So let's find out, I'm not saying you don't have the best people. What I'm saying is, don't tell us you have the best people. Tell us what your people do that make a difference, and that difference, how it relates to solving our challenges. Don't talk about, and it was brought up here, don't talk about your capabilities and this. What is it that your capabilities do? What is it your solution brings that's going to solve our challenge? Again, we talk about those top 3 challenges. That keeps I find that the vendors appreciate that because that keeps the discussion very focused. It focused on what they can talk about and meet our challenges, and then we can have that dialogue. And if it goes well, then there's usually a second follow-up meeting from the action officer side to really dig into that. So I would say, again, to talk about industry engagements, understanding and talk about the miscommunications and all these things, that is a tool that we've used in the PCA's office to engage industry.
I know, Rebecca, earlier you mentioned you wanted to pivot off his input on that about partnerships.
So we've kind of been talking about industry and engagement on the industry side, and that's a lot about what we're here today. And I would also showcase that partnership broadly is what we all need to be doing, whether it's intergovernment, academia, industry. I was just going to kind of shameless plug for the reserve component again that Cyber Yankee just finished its 10th iteration. And it's, for those who might not know too much about Cyber Yankee, it's a National Guard exercise in the Northeast, 6 states. And the National Guard, we've worked to close some gaps in policy and law to where they can work with utilities, for example. And they can do a simulated attack where they're testing our industrial control systems and the critical infrastructure. Ms. Beavers commented on critical infrastructure. I think Josh brought that up earlier today, is maybe those are some lesser focused areas of cyberspace operations, is how can we proactively work with the private utilities and how are we building those bridges? So 10 years going strong. Yeah. Pretty excited about that.
Well, good. And now, Josh, you mentioned earlier you wanted to talk about 8140 and some of the things with the workforce the Navy's doing. You want to share that now?
Sure. Recently the DoD came out with a cyber workforce strategy, the first of its kind, and perhaps even more importantly, they came out with a cyber workforce strategy implementation plan to avoid our aforementioned shelfware problem. We've expanded what was, I think, 54 work roles for a very long time, up to, I think we're up to 72. 71. We're auctioning them. So from a Navy Marine Corps perspective, we've gone as all in as we can go in terms of making sure that we're embracing the new work role codes and coding our civilian and military folks to the best of our ability. mostly in the belief that you measure what matters, right? There's a lot of conversation about, our people are our greatest asset, our people are our #1 priority, and I definitely do not want to see a show of hands of like how many people feel that that their organization makes them feel like they're the most important thing in that organization, because I don't think it bears out that way.
My table would raise their hand over there, I think. I think Jesse and Gene will, yeah. Dave.
So we are driving towards making sure they're coded so that we can use real data to identify where we're falling short on recruiting and retention, where our training gaps are, where our vacancy rates are, how much money we really need for civilian payroll when we add in all the incentives. We have these targeted local market supplements where we pay people 25 to 40% above their base pay. Well, that money has to come from somewhere. So it takes us 3 to 4 years in the planning cycle to get that money into our baseline budget. So we're really trying to lead the charge on the Navy and Marine Corps side at coding all these folks so that we have meaningful data, so that we can make sure we budget and program appropriately, so that we can legitimately take care of our people and make sure that our workforce is more than adequately staffed and more than adequately trained. With the new 8140, the work roles are getting more and more specific. The training and qualification requirements are getting more and more specific. There's a bit of administrative overhead, but as I'm sure I annoy a lot of people by constantly saying, there's a reason the second word in talent management is management. It doesn't take care of itself. It's something that has to be actively managed, ruthlessly, forever. So we're really, kidding aside, embracing that and working with DoD as hopefully as their best partner to make sure we're leading the charge on that.
Well, thanks for sharing what the Navy is doing to try to get better at talent management. So team, we're almost at 10 minutes remaining. I will ask Terry if you can read off 2 questions at a time. We'll get into some speed answering here. I'll ask my panel members to be able to just give, not each one of you will be able to answer both of those questions. So we'll give you an opportunity to pick one which you want to answer, and that way we'll get more questions. So Terry, can you read 2?
Sir, we're actually down to 1 left.
Oh,
Y'all touched on some of the
good.
the topics that were asked, and it's a long one, so bear with me.
Jesse.
Many adjustments have been made to the Cyber Mission Force since it was created. A lot of focus has been on cyber operators and exploitation analysts to increase readiness instead of building the analysis and production workforce. What are your thoughts on conducting a complete force staff estimate to identify what the proper composition of each CMF team type and size of the force is in order to address current and future threats and adversaries?
That is Jesse's question.
What is, I will pass on that, Alex.
So Pat? Anybody?
I'll disagree with the premise of the question.
Boom.
There is always going to be balancing and rebalancing. Again, it's talent management. It's not static. It's not that you do it one time and the model lasts forever. But I don't think that we focus on those high-end roles to the exclusion of all others. And I think that the additional 20 work role codes, I think we've had 10 work roles updated this past year with, I can't remember whether it's 6 new ones and 4 revisions or 4 new ones and 6 revisions. But just this year, on Cybercom's behalf, we redid 10 work roles. Correct me if I'm wrong, Matt? Thank you. So we are constantly looking at that. So I don't reject the question. I reject the premise of the question. It's a good question, but I don't think that we've abandoned that analysis and production side for the sake of the high-end cyber. I think it's a question of we're constantly redefining and things are working itself out.
All right, thank you. You want to think that?
I'll second that.
She seconded that. All right, team members, that was, I think, Terry, last question, right?
Sir, we just got one more in if you have time for it.
Let's go for it.
Okay, with the Air Force being the last service yet to have it, is there any update on Air Force cyber incentive pay?
So we actually, I forget what the TMT OSD tasker is, but there are, so when, I'm not sure if I understand, we were the last to have it. Maybe that's true. I wasn't tracking. We were the last service to have cyber incentive pay, but I know that does exist. Since we've had one before, we've had incentive pay, so I'm not sure exactly what the spirit of that question is, but the services across the board, there's a limited budget, and so when it goes to understanding how we motivate and incentivize that workforce to either recruit or keep or retain our current talent that do cyber operations, that is not a simple decision, right? There's all this calculus that goes into understanding how we compete with industry to make doing mission competitive as opposed to just leaving. That will never be easy. We recognize from the military side that we'll never meet that top line as the industry is, but we can very well make it competitive. We can actually outcompete them from what we have to offer the industry can't, and that is the different mission. And that when I say different mission, we are not profit driven, right? We're not worried about turning that next dollar, and that's not a bad thing, right? We need that relationship with industry, but the military and the government in general is about our security of our nation, and we can provide in that mission set, the different interesting parts of that mission set. We offer everybody up here on this panel within DoD can offer that. So I would again say that we, at least from actually offering it when it first started, maybe we were the last. I'm not tracking that, but I know we do offer incentive pay.
Right. Thank you, Andrew. So I hope you all have learned more about what principal cyber advisors do across the services and at the OSD level. Thank you for all the questions, and I want to be more appreciative and deliberate in the thank yous because I think it's important. So to Wes, who mic'd me up, and then also for Terry, who was the one asking the questions, to our fact checker table over here. We're always getting some fact checking right here, and to my team there for allowing me to harass them as far as the work. I do appreciate each one of you all for what you've offered to the table, and additionally to our panel members that is up here. I think it takes a whole team to be successful. So a round of applause for everybody that made this happen today. And we'll stick a fork in this. So Mike Black, are you doing anything up here for us? All right, so Mike Black is coming up maybe to round us out to tell us are you going to give us a score on how well we did, or what are you going to do? All right, let's do it.
All right, well, panelists, I just want to thank you for joining us here today and taking us down the congressional mandate and the creation of the PCAs. We learned about cyber enchilada, right, Rebecca? Cyber enchilada. We learned, you mentioned cyber enchilada.
You don't remember saying cyber enchilada?
I wrote it down. You said it.
You said it 3 times.
Control Alt.
I don't know what he's talking about.
Okay, cyber enchilada, Navy cyber strategy and implementation plan. We heard about that. We talked about the close coordination with the department and DoD CIOs, and we also heard about the actively and ruthlessly and forever with respect to talent management. And talent management has come up a lot in the different sessions. So really, in lieu of a speaker gift, we're going to donate to the Fisher House on the behalf of the panel here. This concludes today's plenary program, but we do have another set of theater sessions that will run during the networking reception, which I think got started probably about 5 or 10 minutes ago. Tomorrow, we're going to open the day with a set of theater sessions, followed by a keynote from Lieutenant General Robert Skinner, Bob Skinner, the director of DISA and commander of the Joint Force DoD. You can find all those details and the rest by looking on the app or looking at the website for the program's agenda. Again, before we close, I want to remind you that we are going to be moving to the networking reception that's happening out there in the exhibit hall that's supported by Carasoft, Sienna, Comcast Business, EverFox, and Juniper Network. So please join us for that reception, and we'll see you back here tomorrow for those theater sessions at 8:15, and then our keynote at 9:30. Again, thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we thank you all for attending today, and we hope this conference will be a premier professional development event for you. Remember to check afcia.org/signal to find Signal's daily coverage of today's events. Enjoy yourselves this evening at the reception in the exhibit hall, and have a great week here in Baltimore.